Your key light is the most important and defining light in your setup. But by just adding one more light, you can do so many more things to really make your portrait stand out. Now, I'm going to offer some tips on how to use two lights to add more interest to your portraits. Specifically, we're going to talk about things that'll allow you to separate your subject from the background with that extra light, or how to add more interest to your background. We're also going to talk about how to emphasize the look of a figure or a physique. And finally, we're going to discuss more traditional uses of that second light, basically for fill light. We'll talk about two ways that I like to use a light for fill light. First, let's talk about separating your subject from the background. Now, say you've got a one light portrait setup like this, but your subject is fading into darkness on the side opposite of your key light. And you can see here the key light is over here, camera left, it's coming in from this way. And over here on this side, this is the shadow side where most of the shadows are falling. You see that we've got a really dark background. In this case, it's a black background. And that means that the shadow in the hair here is fading off. And you don't really see much separation here. And you can see that here on the contours here, on the torso. So what we're going to do, we have our key light set up right here. What we're going to do is we're going to add our second light over here. So the role of this light is actually to create a highlight that helps outline that side of the figure. We want to outline the shadow side here. It's not something we always want to do, but in this case, that's what we're trying to do. And here we're just using a bare flash. There's no modifier on it like we have with a key light. We have this nice big umbrella to give us some softer light. This is the result we get. And as you can see, now we've got some highlights in the hair, and sometimes that's all you want. Sometimes you're just going for a hair light. Sometimes you'll have that second light coming in straight from above, and it might have some type of a modifier on it, maybe a grid or even a small softbox, and you're trying to hit the hair and maybe both shoulders, but in this case we're coming in at an angle and we're just hitting the hair here, and you can see how now we've got that separation. Sometimes we call this light a kicker because it visually kicks the subject out of the background, at least on one side. And so you can see here the highlights here on the shoulder and up here, not so much here. There's just a thin little highlight, and sometimes that's all you need. All right, now we're going to turn that backlight around and point it toward the background. And you've got another effective kind of separation. Now you've lightened up the background, so you've got contrast between the darker side of the subject and the lighter side of the background. And depending on how you have that second light hitting the background, you might have a really dark area here. Now this is the same black background as we were using before, but now it's a little lighter because we're hitting it with some light, and it gradually drops off going in this direction. Let's say it dropped off really sharply. You'd still have that black background here, and so then you'd have the lighter area of the subject against the darker area of the background, and then on the opposite side you'd have the darker area of the subject contrasting with the lighter area of the background. So another good, effective kind of separation. And I use this technique quite a bit. Now you can create separation and add a little more interest to the background by adding in some color. This is another type of visual separation, color contrast. The light is essentially doing the same thing as we did in the previous example, but now we're adding a red gel. Now the color gets splashed onto the same black background that we've been using, and we get a deep red effect back there. And you can put a gel over your light any way that'll work. You might notice that I'm using a reflector and barn doors in this example. Now let me show you what I did here. I purchased a set like this. It came with a reflector, barn doors, some gels, and a grid. The mount that I used, that I've been using with the flash up to this point, is this S-type mount, and it's compatible with Bowen's type modifiers. So you can see these three notches here. That's indicative of a Bowen's style modifier. So this reflector just mounts right onto that flash holder, and on top of the reflector you can place these barn doors, and these barn doors hold either this grid or one of these gels. And I just put that red gel on there. So it was easy enough to just slip this on, and I had the benefit of the barn doors to help shape the light a little. Now I will include links to all of the stuff I'm showing you in the description down below. Now, reflecting the background light back toward the camera is also a fun way to add a lot of interest to the look of the background. Now, I had a couple of colorful door fringe foil curtains that I threw up over my black seamless, and I just positioned the light so that I'd get a nice sparkly look toward the camera. You can find these door fringe curtains at party stores or on Amazon, and they come in different colors. The trick here is to blur out the background so that it's less obvious that you're using something like these door fringe curtains. You might be using gift wrapping paper or some other kind of shiny material back there, but you don't want it to look like that. You want it to look, I guess, something a little more special than that. And so what I'm doing is using a wider aperture. I'm using f2.8 instead of most of these other shots were shot at f8. The way that I'm able to do that is by popping an ND filter on there. That way I avoid having to resort to something like high-speed sync or something else that's going to complicate things or reduce my flash output. You know, if you use light at a hard angle, you can really emphasize a physique. I mean, even with just one light, you can create some really nice boudoir or bodyscape shots or figure studies. But if you add a second light in a double side light setup, you can really highlight the contours. This is easy to set up, but you've got to experiment to get the look you want. By the way, if you want a shiny skin look, which I'm not doing here, just Google and search for different techniques for that. Now, there are baby oil and glycerin water mixtures that you can use, but just make sure you do your research and figure out what's going to work best for the look that you're trying to get as far as shiny skin. A second light can also be used as a fill light. This is the traditional 2-light setup. I always stress that you've got to learn how to use your key light first because it's your main light. It's the defining light, the light that models your subject's face and shape more than any other light in the setup. And think of it this way, all other lights should somehow support the role of the key light. The second light is placed and modified so as to add a little light on the shadow side of the face or figure. And this reduces the contrast from light to shadow and softens the look of the light. And the difference in the intensity or brightness between the two lights is often called the lighting ratio. Now, you're the photographer, so you get to decide the ratio. In other words, you get to decide how much fill light you're going to use to get the look you want. So there's no rules here. There are some traditional lighting ratios, but really you get to decide how bright you want your fill light to be and how much you're going to reduce contrast, because sometimes you want a lot of fill light like I'm using here, and sometimes you want a little more contrast, so you're going to use a little less fill light on that side. Again, that is a more traditional use of 2 lights. You've got your main light and you've got your fill light. Now, clamshell lighting is another thing that you can do with 2 lights. And I've said this before, it's like taking the key light and fill light setup that we just looked at and putting it on its side. I've got an entire video on clamshell lighting. I'm going to place a link to that here. Really, this is a pretty easy concept. Just place your key light up high in something similar to butterfly lighting. Next, place your second light below it, and that second light is essentially a fill light. The main thing to be aware of is the lighting ratio. You really don't want the bottom light to overpower the top light. It's just not going to look right if you do that. You want it just powerful enough to reduce the shadows. What you're trying to do here is de-emphasize the details on the face. So this is what you're going to use lots of times for what some people would consider more flattering light. Now, this is simple clamshell lighting, but I mean, variations to this are like when you add reflectors to the side. You can even add more lights, but we're just talking about using 2 lights. But yeah, sometimes you'll add reflectors to the side and just really get a wraparound frontal lighting. And that kind of lighting is often used for beauty shots and for pageant portraits and things like that. So there you go. I showed you how to separate your subject from your background, a very important technique. I showed you how to add interest to your background by turning that light onto your background and either splashing it with color, using some reflective material, or just hitting the background with extra light. That'll help you add more separation and interest to that background. And we also talked about ways to use a couple of lights to emphasize a physique or figure. And finally, we talked about how to use your second light as a basic fill light. So try these techniques out for yourself and just experiment with them and apply them to your own portraiture. If you'd like all the details about the gear and the settings and the distances used, you can go ahead and check out my ebook, 2 Light Portraits. I'll link to that below, and I'll also include those links to the different things that I showed you in the video. So thanks for watching, guys. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and the little bell notification icon. Also leave me a comment and click that like button. That's about it for today. See you next time.